So the next section I hit is how to choose a seat post and saddle. This is surprisingly an undervalued part of trying to improve your bike comfort. So just before we get into the actual what to look out for in a saddle and seat post, I just wanted to say that there's no substitute to just spending hours in the saddle and become more comfortable on the bike. We all know that our nether regions can be hardened by just riding over time, and it just takes a few weeks off the bike and when you go back onto the bike that you know that these things are more tender here than you remember. So that being said, you still have to find a saddle that fits you well, not just for your body but also your riding style. Seat post also has a big part to play in this. So let's have a look at different factors to consider when you're choosing a seat post and saddle. Let's start with seat posts. Just as I was saying with the frame section, that you can check your seat post diameters to make sure the diameter of seat post you're getting will match your frame, because different frames require different seat post diameters. Some frames even have seat posts that are an odd shape. For example, my Giant Defy is the D-shaped seat post. If you have a narrow frame, then you're going to need a narrow seat post. In these cases, these seat posts will probably be supplied with frames, so you don't need to worry too much about that. The simplest way to find out your seat post diameter is just simply measure it. So here's a seat post I just happen to be laying around, and it may already say it on it. The frame you choose, you can either measure the seat post diameter, or it's just having the specifications of what seat post you need. Again, when you buy, you choose what you need. If you have one lying around, you can just measure it. It's just a diameter, so it's the width of it. The main sizes are 27.2, 30.9 and 31.6. There are other sizes, but they're a rarity, thank God. You can get a seat post shim that if your bike needs a bigger diameter but you want to use a smaller diameter seat post due to comfort reasons, then you can get a shim that will bridge the gap. The length of the seat post will also need to be considered. This will depend on the geometry of the bike and also the length of your legs. If you're not sure what length you need, then remember that it's better to have a seat post that's too long than too short. The seat post should insert into your seat tube at least 3 to 4 inches. So there we go. That much. This will depend on the material and the rider weight. If you're using carbon and you're heavy, then go deeper. You don't want to crack that frame. When I'm buying a seat post for a new bike, I normally buy the longest option, if there is an option. If it's too long then and you're like a real weight weenie, then you do have the option of cutting it. Just make sure you don't cut it too short. So what material should your seat post be? You can get steel, aluminum, carbon and titanium seat posts. Steel seat posts aren't around too much anymore. They're heavy and they do have a tendency to rust after a while. You see those in real budget bikes. Aluminium has become the most popular as it's cheap and it's relatively lightweight and it doesn't rust. Carbon seat posts are even lighter and absorb vibration. The downside to carbon seat posts is that they are pricey, and although they are quite strong, if they do break due to a crash or whatever, then you can't use them, they're gone. Where aluminium seat posts would probably bend before they break, so just let me know. There is also a less popular option, which is titanium. This offers all the benefits of all the materials above. It's lightweight, absorbent, it's quite strong and doesn't rust. It is, however, very expensive. So if you are getting one, make sure it's the right shape and length that you need, which I'll discuss now. What is layback? Well, layback, which is not to be confused with setback, which is to mount distance. The clamp is behind the centre of the seat post. So the centre of the seat post is here. You can see it's actually clamping here. So that's that's called setback. Layback, on the other hand, is when the seat post is literally bent at this section. So it goes up, maybe from here. It's actually bent back. So the clamp would be actually way back here. Brings the saddle much further back than you can achieve with layback. Sorry, setback. I'm confusing myself. The reasons to get a layback is if you feel that you're riding in a too upright of a position, or if you have a bike fit and they suggest it. I wouldn't suggest getting a layback just because of the way it looks. You only get it if you need it. Next thing you might want to consider is how your saddle is attached to your seat post, so the clamping area where the rails of the saddle attaches to your seat post. Okay, so it's this area here. You can see the two rails of the saddle. I have a saddle here too, don't believe it. These rails of the saddle go in and attach in there. This clamp then is screwed down onto it and holds it in place. Okay. Thankfully, most manufacturers have stuck to the same standard, which is the 7mm rail for the saddle. Just makes it much easier when selecting a seat post. Another thing you may need to consider is, so this part of the bike is your seat post clamp. So it's this area here. This needs to be the right size in relation to your seat tube. Don't measure here, measure underneath or where this is going to sit. If I take this off now, screw this up, you'll be able to see that the diameter where this sits is actually smaller than the seat tube. So make sure you measure this diameter where it's going to sit, not this diameter. Once you have the correct diameter, you then just have to choose the clamping type. Some clamps just use a bolt to tighten them, while others use a quick release method, which is very handy to adjust the saddle height while you're out on the road. Which one you go for is entirely up to you. If you're a weight weenie, then you should know the quick release are slightly heavier because obviously there's more to them. So if you know your saddle height and you know you won't be moving it, then there's no reason to have a quick release. Saying that though, before I had my dropper post, I used to have a quick release on my mountain bike, and it meant that if I was going down really rugged terrain, really downhill section where I wanted my seat post out of the way, I found that having my seat post moved down meant that I had much more control. This meant that obviously I could go faster downhill. Yeah, and when I got to the bottom, I could just adjust the seat post again up to my correct height and pedal off. So yeah, it does have its advantages, especially now this bike I'm building will be for going off-road too, but it's up to you what you choose. Do you need a dropper post? Well, as I was just saying there, you can get a dropper post. They are great for rough terrain. Get the seat post out of your way and a push of the button. But if you don't feel that you're going to be using it, don't get it. Should you get a suspension seat post? Well, I have never used them, to tell you the truth. The thing that turns me off them is the weight. If you look at the weight, they're at least twice the price of twice the weight of a normal seat post. There are different ways of doing this. Some have telescopic suspension, some just use rubber dampers. I've never used them, so I'm sorry I can't say how effective they are. Not saying I never will. Probably if I was going to get a suspension fork, I'd probably get, I know you can get a suspension fork that is also telescopic, so you could put two things at one there. So I'm just going to wait and see. I'll put this bike together, and if I feel I'm moving the seat post up and down a lot, I'm going to get myself a telescopic suspension dropper post. I'll let you know how that goes. Sometimes the thing you need to be aware of is seat post slippage. This is when, even if you have the seat clamp tightened as tight as you should go, the seat post will still slip. And yeah, it's happened to me a few years ago, and God, it drove me nuts. There's paste you can get that goes onto the seat post, and when you clamp down it grips it better. For carbon, there's carbon paste. Again, I've never used this. I never had an issue on my carbon bike, but I have heard some people saying you shouldn't use it. Carbon paste has tiny glass fibres in it. That's what gives it the grip, and great grip, it will not move. Some people are saying that in the event of a crash, if it doesn't move, then it will break. It will break your bike, it will break your carbon, and it's it that glass it's just bad for your carbon. Again, I'm just telling you what I heard. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but yeah, I just go with normal pace first and see if that helps. How to choose the right saddle. So most people think that some dark art to find the right saddle that will fit your bottom just right. In reality, there are only a few factors to look out for. There isn't one type of saddle that will fit you well. There are many. The factors I'm going to discuss now are just to give you a good starting point. If you have all these factors right, your saddle should fit you well. If it doesn't, then it's more than likely your position on the bike and not the saddle at all. Some people think, oh God, I've got a sore bum, it must be my saddle. No, not necessarily. It could be just your position. I've ridden for days on all sorts of bikes and all sorts of saddles. With the exception of one, I have never had an issue with a saddle. So to me, this proves that it's position rather than saddle. Right, so the first thing we need to be aware of is saddle width. This is probably the most important to get right when choosing a saddle. To get this right, we must first measure our sit bones. These are the bones in our lower bottom. If you've no idea what I'm talking about, you find them if you sit in a hard surface and put your knees up to your chest. You should now be sitting on the hard balls of your bum, or you like to call them. So these are your sit bones. And to measure it, well, the best way to do is go to your local bike fitter and they'll measure you up pretty quickly and tell you what size you are, what size you need. However, you can measure them at home. Well, what I use is some corrugated cardboard, 2 marbles or small balls, and a measuring tape. So all you do is you put your cardboard on a hard surface, below knee height, sit on the cardboard, leaning forward as if you're in the riding position. It's important to mimic the riding position as much as possible. Once you have pressed into the cardboard with your sit bones, you should now see 2 dents. Put the marbles into each dent, and the marbles should roll to the lowest dent. Now just measure between each of the marbles, centre to centre. You now have the width of your sit bones. You can use this info when selecting a saddle. The usable width of your saddle shouldn't be smaller than your sit bone width. If it is smaller than your sit bones, then you'll be sitting on your soft tissue. This can lead to numbness and circulation issues. Should you get a saddle cutout? Having a saddle with the correct width doesn't mean you won't have numbness, especially if you're riding in an aggressive position. As you lean forward, there's less pressure on your sit bones and more pressure on your peroneal tissue. Riding in this position for too long and you can restrict blood flow and can lead to numb genitals. I know a guy that done an ultracycle and afterwards he had no feeling in his nether regions. Luckily for him, everything's back to normal now. This is where a saddle cutout can help. By removing the part of the saddle where soft tissue tends to press, this allows more blood flow to flow through, which will restrict numbness. And why is there different sizes of cutouts? Well, you see, the bike and the saddle is a symmetrical object. However, our bodies are asymmetrical, meaning you may not be fully aligned one side to the other. If your hips are perfectly aligned, then a small cutout will do, because it'll be where your soft tissue is. It's not going to move and you're just going to cycle, and your soft tissue is going to stay over where the cutout is. But if you rotate or tilt, your soft tissue is going to be moving. And if you have a smaller cutout, it could actually be worse, because you have less saddle holding you up. And so that soft tissue now has less saddle holding you up, so that any part of the saddle that there is actually having more pressure on your soft tissue. Hard to explain. So that's why they have larger holes in some saddles. Although I have never actually suffered from numbness in the genital area, thank God, I have used cutouts before, and actually still do, as you can see on my bike here. It is comfortable, but it's not any more comfortable than my other bikes where I have no cutouts. I was just trying to see what it would add to it, and in some cases on that saddle I find it more pressure on my sit bones, because obviously this whole area here, that's less area where I'm being held up, so all my more weight is going to be on my sit bones, because I'm not being held up in this area. But what I do on my other bikes, good saddles there, the Physique Alante, I think it's called, brilliant saddle. But if I do find I'm having slight issues there, the easiest thing to do is just rotate the the saddle forward slightly, so my sit bones are sitting more here and my soft tissue gets more room, so the blood flows better, okay? Obviously you can't go too far, you'll have other issues, but that's what I've done, and to relieve that, and it works a treat. Padding. You don't need padding on your saddle. Padding can actually make things a lot worse. I remember my wife got me an exercise bike when we had kids. I think she wanted me to stay home more or something, but anyway, after 20 minutes into the first ride, and my god, my whole ass was numb. It was just, the problem is there's too much surface area. It's stopping blood flow everywhere on your butt. Yeah, padding is not necessarily advised. Just look at Brooks saddles, which are considered to be the most comfortable saddles, or one of the most comfortable saddles, and they're made of leather. They don't have any padding, really. The flex, they're soft alright, but they don't have any padding. So yeah, that's an important lesson there. Don't be getting a big padded saddle. And finally, just the saddle rails. You can get them in different materials. Most common is still chromated steel. They're relatively inexpensive, and they have a nice flex to them. If you want to go even lighter, you can get hollow titanium rods, and for the lightest option you can go carbon, but really you need a carbon seat post then to allow for carbon, because I think carbon rails have different diameter than the normal rails. Yeah, I think they're 7 mils one way and 9 mils the other, so they're not even round or oblong. So watch out for that if you're getting carbon rails. You have to get a seat post to go with it, or at least a seat post clamp. I'm not sure how it works, I've never done that. Be careful of that. And that's pretty much all you need to consider when getting a seat post and saddle.